Howdy everyone, welcome to another episode of Devlogs. Small update on the senior project. I created events for the hover states of the title screen buttons. Depending on whether the player hovers over, leaves, or clicks a button, a sound complements each of those actions. A script was needed for the hover on and off states, though the button object has a pre-made on-click component I was able to use. I had a separate script for the button click action, which, looking back on it, I could have just put that in the script I just showed you, but that's a thing I'll think about later. We are moving to Lesson 5. Which is the one from this certification I have been most excited for. We have understanding stingers, using states, and using switch sub-tracks. So up until now, I have been using events in Wwise to simply post a sound when an action in a scene occurs. There are different ways we can post events, however, and stingers are one of those different ways. Rather than post an audio event when it is called, stingers make it so the event is called in time with the music. Let's move forward to figure out how this works in Wwise. Stingers can be added to music segments during any instance the music is playing. We want a stinger to play when a specific event occurs in the game, like when our player walks through a teleporter, a cymbal swell should play. The music might not be at an appropriate time for a cymbal swell to come in, but stingers take this into account and can influence the behavior of our music to successfully incorporate our stinger in time with the music. Since a stinger can come into play during various music themes, we are going to create a space for it outside of the playlist containers. I'm going to create a new child object in the music work unit, choosing virtual folder and naming it stingers. Once created, I am going into the File Explorer to find a cymbal swell audio file provided for this lesson, then import it into the folder as a music segment. Alright, now dial in, because how we configure this music segment is going to be different from how we've configured music segments in the past. For starters, we will not be setting the tempo or time signature for this music segment. That might sound weird, but what we're going to do instead will ensure this sound plays in time with any musical theme, no matter the tempo or time signature. The thing that we want in time with our music is the apex moment of the stinger. For the cymbal swell, this would be the peak of its crescendo. I am going to drag the entry and exit cues to the peak of the cymbal swell, making the content before it pre-entry audio and the content after exit content. Let's move forward to see how this becomes useful. To implement a stinger into the music, we need a trigger to call it, which will require making a state from the GameSyncs tab. When I go to the GameSyncs tab, you will see there is a triggers parent in the hierarchy. I'm going to create a music work unit for organizational purposes, then as a child object of the music work unit, create a trigger object and call it cymbal_swell. When this trigger gets called during gameplay, it needs to be associated with the cymbal swell since that is the music segment we want to play. I'm going to do this for the combat music playlist, and in the property editor for this playlist, open the stinger tab. In the view that appears under this tab, I will click the double arrow button to add our trigger. Then I will add and drop the music segment that we want to play into the space with our newly added trigger. The music segment appears under the segment to play as our sound that will play. To the right and under play at, I am going to select next bar. The stinger is configured, and so it can now be assigned to an event as a complementary sound that comes in when the event is called. We are going to do this for the teleporter event for when the player walks through a teleporter. When I find the teleport event under the property editor in the events tab, I will right-click the event, click add, then navigate the trigger and assign a trigger to it. It's created, but needs a target. I simply need to drag and drop the trigger we created into the target column where the box is red. We want this stinger to be implemented for the other music container playlists, which simply means repeating the previous steps for the other playlist containers, though we won't have to go back to the Events tab, just the stingers one for each playlist. To test the functionality of a stinger, we are going to create a Soundcaster session. This is something I did not cover in this series and is from the Wwise 101 lesson, but you'll see me configure this and I'll explain it as I go. If you want to know more about Soundcaster sessions, you can go to Lesson 6 of the Wwise 101 certification. To go to a Soundcaster session, I will navigate to Views, then choose Soundcaster. There are some sessions created for testing other feats of the Cube game, but we need a new session to test the stinger. I'm going to click the double arrow button and select New to create a new session. I will name this session Music Testing. I need to add the music playlist containers I gave the stinger to. I can highlight all playlists from the Project Explorer, then drag them into the grid area where you will see them appear. In the Triggers area of the view, you will see the Cymbal Swell trigger has appeared. The only thing we're missing is the Teleporter event. I will find it in the Events tab of the Project Explorer, then drag it into the bottom section of the grid area beneath the playlists. Now when I play a playlist, I can play the event whenever in the music and you will get to observe its behavior as it times the entry of the cymbal swell to come at the start of a measure of whatever music theme is playing. Okay, it was really hard to hear with the Boss playlist container, but once I moved to the Explore playlist, that was super cool to hear the timing of the cymbal after the teleport sound played. I'm going to create another trigger, this time for a health pickup stinger. However, this stinger sounds different depending on where we are in the music. If the music is at the bridge, a different note should play, whereas any other part of the music will play a different note. When I import the two music segments, I only need to create one trigger because both sounds will get called in the same manner, which is on the next beat. However, these triggers are assigned to music segments. I need to make sure I drag and drop the correct music segment onto the trigger. Once configured, I assign these triggers to the Item Health 100 and Item Health 200 events. When I bring back up the Soundcaster session, all I have to do is drag and drop these two newly configured events onto the grid space, allowing me to test them in conjunction with the music. we're going to use states to determine when the arpeggio track should and should not play during gameplay. In this case, the player can pick up a super gem that, once acquired, will enable a state that plays our arpeggio tracks. The arpeggio tracks are randomized thanks to our configurations in recent videos. However, there is no longer a need for one of its random options to be an empty track, since this is now a track that will be guaranteed to play when the player has picked up a super gem, and so I will delete the empty track. Next, I am going to assign the state groups to the arpeggio music track. I initially did this for the whole playlist container on accident, which turned on and off the whole music segment, so make sure you don't do that. Under the States tab of the Music Tracks Property Editor, I will click Add State Group and select the Super Gem one. You can see the yes and no states are added alongside the state group. For the no state, I'm going to set the voice volume to its lowest value. When the no state is activated, which is when the Super Gem power-up is inactive, the arpeggio track will be silenced, whereas it will actively play if it is in the yes state. I set the change of state to occur at the next bar of music. I can now move to the transport control and open the states view in order to test how this sounds. The transition is too long, and we can easily change this. I can double-click the state group to open up its property editor, and within that view, set the default transition time from 1 second to 0.1 seconds. Once happy with the changes, I will do the same thing for the Combat B music segment. Okay, so if you remember subtracks, like the one for the arpeggio tracks, we had a pool of possibilities for which arpeggio track will play as the music loops. The selection of these tracks are randomized, but we are now going to use switch groups to give us direct control over which subtrack plays. Our reason for doing this will be in relation to the player's health, because we want for the electric guitar track to get more and more intense as the health drops. Switch groups can achieve this, and is another callback to something I learned in the Wwise 101 certification. Again, I will explain as I go, but feel free to check out Lesson 3 of the 101 certification to brush up on these concepts. First, we need to configure the switch group, which exists in the Game Syncs tab of the Project Explorer under the Switches folder. I am going to create a music work unit, once again for organizational purposes, and as a child object of this work unit, create a switch group and name it health_status. I am going to create 4 switches in this container, which will represent 4 states of being our player is in, ranging from healthy to almost dead. These 4 switches will allow for 4 signs of progression toward how much damage the player has taken. The electric guitar tracks are currently in sequence mode, though we can easily change it to be a switch music track instead. When I go to the Combat A music segments editor and find the guitar tracks, all I need to do is right-click the guitar tracks header and select switch. The track colors change from green to yellow, signifying they are now switch tracks. Coincidentally, there are 4 guitar tracks, just like there are 4 switches. It's as if the lesson planned this. We can assign the switch group to these guitar tracks by going to the guitar tracks properties in the General Settings tab of the Property Editor. In the bottom right of the view is the switch section, where I can assign the switch group and set the default state to healthy, since the player will always start a level healthy. Next up is setting up the subtracks to associate with a specific switch. Going back to the music segment editor, I can right-click each subheader and select Set Association, assigning a switch to each guitar track. If you remember in previous videos, these guitar track iterations get progressively more intense, which is perfect for the switch container system we are working towards. To test this setup, we can go to the transport control where we had previously previewed states, and instead switch to the switch view. Get it? Anyways, I'm not sorry. When you're in the switch view, you can play back the music and test out each switch while the music is playing. You may have noticed that when I jumped between switches, there was no transition and I had to replay the music segment. We need to set up the transitions, but at least we know the system works. This will be done in the Transitions tab of Combat A Music Segment's Property Editor. This view comes with powerful tools that will be elaborated on next lesson, but for now, we are going to tweak the existing rule that is making it so that the transition between music subtracks is happening at the end of the exit cue. When I select the transition, I'm going to navigate down to the Source Property section and change Exit Source At to Next Bar. Let's listen. The transitions are a bit abrupt, and so I'm going to hop back to the source properties and check the box for fade out, which should give us a crossfade effect between switches. We need to create the crossfade though, and so I will edit the properties of the fade by clicking the edit button. I'm going to select the time property and change it to 0.5, allowing for a quick fade out. Now I can close this edit view and move to the fade in property, checking that box and clicking the edit button. In this view, I'm going to set the time to 0.5 as well. Let's take a listen. This is definitely better, but it'd be nice to hear the downbeat of what we're transitioning to. To better hear the downbeat of what we're transitioning to, we can open the edit properties for the fade-in view and change offset to -0.5 seconds. This means the first half second of what we're fading into will come at full volume. Let's listen. Since the health in the game is a value range tied to an RTPC, rather than 4 different states like with our switches, we need to map the RTPC to our switch group to configure which sections of the health range will trigger certain switches. This can be done in the property editor of the health status switch group. In its property editor, I will enable the Use Game Parameter checkbox. I can now click the double arrow icon and add the RTPC that needs to be referenced, which is the player health 1. Once assigned, the 4 switches are evenly split along the y-axis of the RTPC's graph. The x-axis shows the health, which spans from 0 to 100. I can create points that determine which switch should be active depending on where the player's health is. Once I have set up all my points, I can reopen my Soundcaster session and you'll see that the RTPCs are already visible in one of the views. I can drag a slider to simulate health while music plays in order to test out our switches linked to the RTPC. Before I do this, I will also open up the profiler so you can see a log of what's happening. wraps it up for this lesson. If you followed through and were confused at any point, feel free to leave a comment. I will again recommend revisiting the lessons in the 101 certification to understand some of what I went over. At the end of each lesson is also a video breakdown provided by Audiokinetic, which goes over more quickly what I have been talking about. That's it for this video though. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.